Ruby Calloway, a 65-year-old black woman, stood in the courtroom, facing Judge Walter Grayson. He looked down at her with a faint, amused smile. Ruby wasn't a lawyer, just a grandmother and business owner, standing up for herself in a legal battle. She was representing herself, hoping to keep the bakery that had been in her family for decades. Across the room stood Bryce Sterling, a high-powered corporate lawyer. He adjusted his tie with a smug look on his face, clearly dismissing Ruby. To him, she was just an elderly woman with no legal knowledge or experience, someone easy to push aside. He couldn't take her seriously. After all, he had spent years in the courtroom, fighting battles for massive corporations, while Ruby had spent her life baking and raising her family. To him, this case was already won. Judge Grayson shared a similar view. He barely glanced at Ruby as he looked through his papers, shaking his head as if he already knew how this would go. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Mr. Calloway," he began, his voice dripping with skepticism, "representing yourself?" His question hung in the air, almost mocking. He didn't believe for a second that this woman, with no law degree or corporate experience, could possibly stand up to the powerhouse law firm on the other side. Ruby met the judge's eyes without flinching. She wasn't intimidated, though she could sense the doubt in the room. She had fought battles all her life, raising children, building a small business, and defending her family's legacy. And this fight, this battle for her bakery, was no different. She wasn't going to let anyone underestimate her. Sterling smirked from across the room, whispering something to his assistant. The sound of their laughter stung, but Ruby kept her face still. She wasn't there to prove anything to them, she was there to protect what was hers. The judge's dismissal only made her more determined. With a deep breath, Ruby stood tall and ready, prepared to show everyone in that courtroom just how wrong they were to underestimate her. Ruby Calloway's family bakery had been a beloved part of the community for decades. The smell of freshly baked bread and pastries had welcomed families for years, and the shop had become a symbol of tradition and hard work. But now, a large corporation called Barkwell Foods was trying to force her out of business. They were using shady tactics to pressure her into selling, offering her far less money than the bakery was worth. Barkwell Foods had been quietly buying up small businesses in the area, using their power and influence to push owners like Ruby into accepting lowball offers. They didn't care about the community, only about expanding their reach. They saw Ruby's bakery as just another piece of property to add to their growing empire. But Ruby wasn't about to let that happen. She believed that the offer Barkwell made was based on dishonest appraisals and hidden deals that undervalued her business. She knew that the corporation had been using these fraudulent tactics to get small business owners to sell without realizing the true value of what they were giving up. Ruby had worked too hard, spent too many years building the bakery into something special to let it go so easily. For Ruby, this fight wasn't just about money, it was personal. The bakery had been in her family for generations, passed down from her grandparents, and it meant more to her than just a business. It was a part of her identity, a piece of her family's history. The thought of losing it, of letting someone else take it away, filled her with determination. She knew that if she sold, the community would lose something special. The bakery wasn't just a place to buy bread, it was a gathering spot for neighbors, a place where memories were made, and traditions were kept alive. Ruby couldn't let that be erased by a corporation that didn't care about the people it was affecting. Ruby's pride and her family's legacy were at stake. She wasn't going to let Barkwell Foods take her business without a fight. This was her home, her history, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. She wasn't just defending a bakery, she was standing up for everything her family had worked so hard to build. Bryce Sterling stood tall and confident as he began his argument. With a smooth voice, he told the court that Ruby was simply being unreasonable by refusing to sell her bakery. He argued that Barkwell Foods had made her a fair offer, one that any sensible business owner would accept. "This is a reasonable deal," he said. "The law is on our side, and Miss Calloway is just clinging to nostalgia and sentimentality. She's refusing to face the facts. Sterling's words filled the courtroom, and some people in the audience nodded, thinking he had a point. He was a corporate lawyer with years of experience, after all. Ruby, however, wasn't intimidated. She had heard it all before and wasn't about to back down. She stood up and looked directly at the judge, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor," she began, "the deal Barkwell Foods has offered me isn't fair. I've done my research, and I know what's really going on." She took a deep breath and continued, "This company isn't just making offers, they're using predatory tactics to force small business owners like me into selling. I've spent months looking into the way they've manipulated the system. They've used deceptive appraisals and undervalued my bakery to make the offer look better than it really is." The room went quiet as Ruby spoke, the courtroom listening closely. She wasn't just talking about her own situation, she was exposing something much bigger. Barkwell Foods has been doing this to other local businesses as well. They've been pressuring owners with lowball offers, using unfair appraisals to trick them into selling. They want to take over the neighborhood, and they don't care who they hurt along the way. Ruby held up a stack of papers and handed them to the judge. "These are the documents I've found. They show that the appraisals of my bakery were deliberately manipulated to make it appear worth less than it truly is. The company has been using the same tricks on other businesses in the area. It's a pattern, Your Honor, and it's illegal." Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Ruby's words sank in. He had expected her to crumble under pressure, but instead, she had turned the tables. She wasn't just fighting for her bakery, she was standing up for other small businesses that had been taken advantage of by the same corporation. The courtroom was now on edge, and Ruby's determination was clear. Bryce Sterling wasn't about to let Ruby's accusations stand. He shook his head, a smug look crossing his face as he responded, "Miss Calloway, I think you don't fully understand business practices. What you're describing isn't illegal. This is just how business works. You're clinging to emotion and sentiment, not facts." He waved his hand dismissively, as if Ruby's claims were nothing more than a misunderstanding. But Ruby wasn't intimidated. She had spent months researching Barkwell Foods and learning about their business practices. She knew exactly what she was talking about, and she wasn't going to let Sterling push her around. Ruby stood tall, her voice steady as she dug deeper into the company's shady financial dealings. "Your Honor," Ruby said, "it's not about business practices, this is about illegal actions. Barkwell Foods isn't just making reasonable offers. They've been using false appraisals and manipulating the market to drive small businesses like mine out of business. And I can prove it." She pulled out a document from her folder and handed it to the judge. As he looked over the papers, Ruby continued, "This internal memo from Barkwell Foods shows exactly what they've been doing. It clearly states that they want to eliminate competition in the neighborhood to expand their brand. That's their goal, taking out small businesses to make more room for their empire." A gasp spread across the courtroom. Sterling's confident posture faltered. He had underestimated Ruby, and now she had just given the judge the smoking gun, the proof that Barkwell Foods was intentionally trying to destroy the community for their own gain. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his attention fully on Ruby now. As she spoke, it became clear that Ruby wasn't just some unprepared business owner. She knew the law, and she understood exactly how to expose the corporation's tactics. The more Ruby talked, the more the judge started to listen. Sterling, on the other hand, was growing frustrated. He had expected this to be an easy win, but Ruby wasn't backing down. She was systematically revealing how Barkwell Foods had used illegal and unethical practices to push small businesses out of the way. The more evidence Ruby presented, the more it was clear, she wasn't just defending her bakery, she was exposing a corporate conspiracy. Ruby wasn't floundering. She was in control, and Sterling knew it. His frustration grew as he realized the case wasn't going in his favor anymore. Judge Grayson's eyes narrowed as Ruby continued to lay out the truth. It was no longer a simple property dispute, it had turned into a fight for justice, and Ruby was winning. As Ruby continued to present her evidence, Sterling's confidence began to fade. He had come into the courtroom with the belief that this case would be an easy win. He thought he could simply dismiss Ruby as an inexperienced, sentimental business owner, but she had proven him wrong at every turn. The more she exposed, the more uncomfortable Sterling became. At first, he tried to maintain his smug demeanor, shifting in his seat and adjusting his tie, but as Ruby uncovered more of Barkwell Foods' shady practices, he started to fumble. He stood up, tried to interrupt, and even dismissed her claims as ridiculous, but the words no longer had the same power. He wasn't as smooth as he had been at the beginning of the trial. His argument was crumbling, and he knew it. Ruby was relentless, presenting one damning piece of evidence after another. She was calm and collected, confident in her facts. The documents she provided showed clear proof of the illegal tactics Barkwell Foods had used, deceptive appraisals, false paperwork, and internal communications stating their intention to eliminate small businesses like hers. Each new revelation made Sterling's case weaker. He had no defense. It was as if Ruby had torn apart everything he had built. The courtroom, once filled with quiet whispers of disbelief, was now hushed. Even the judge, who had initially doubted Ruby, was paying close attention. Judge Grayson's eyes were focused on Ruby's evidence, and he no longer seemed amused. Ruby had completely turned the tables. Sterling stood up, attempting to salvage something from the wreckage of his argument. "Your Honor," he said, his voice shaky, "these are just misunderstandings. There's no proof that Barkwell Foods is acting illegally. We've made a fair offer. Miss Calloway is just," he faltered, trying to regain control, but Ruby's evidence had already sealed his fate. Judge Grayson raised his hand, signaling for silence. The judge then looked at Sterling, his expression stern. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice low but firm. "The evidence presented here today is more than clear. You and your client, Barkwell Foods, have been using deceptive and illegal tactics to undervalue this woman's business. You have tried to force her into selling her bakery for far less than it's worth, and that is unacceptable." Sterling's face turned red as he tried to argue, but the judge cut him off. "The court finds that Barkwell Foods has engaged in predatory practices, and I am ruling in favor of Miss Calloway. The offer you made is invalid. The bakery's true value must be recognized, and you are ordered to give Miss Calloway what her business is truly worth. Furthermore, Barkwell Foods is ordered to cease its predatory practices immediately, and the company will be held accountable for its actions." Ruby couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over her as Judge Grayson delivered his decision. The fight had been long, but she had won. Her bakery, the heart of her family's legacy, would not be taken from her. The judge's words were clear: the corporation had been wrong, and Ruby had proven it. Sterling, once so sure of his victory, stood silent, his face twisted in disbelief. He knew he had lost. There was no way to escape the truth Ruby had exposed. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Ruby remained calm. She had done what she set out to do, she had protected her family's bakery and shown that, even against a powerful corporation, the truth could prevail. Ruby's victory wasn't just a legal win, it was a win for her community, for small business owners everywhere, and for the belief that justice could still be served, no matter the odds. Ruby walked out of the courtroom, her heart pounding with the weight of her victory. She had done it, she had saved her family's bakery, a business that had been in her family for generations. It wasn't just about the bakery, it was about her community, her history, and proving that even people like her, older, not trained in law, could stand up against powerful corporations. She had shown that the little guy could win, and she had done it in front of the very people who had doubted her. The relief and pride she felt were overwhelming. Ruby wasn't just walking away with the preservation of her bakery. She was walking away with the knowledge that her fight had meant something bigger. It was a victory for small businesses everywhere and for anyone who had ever been underestimated. As she made her way down the courthouse steps, Ruby caught a familiar voice calling her name. She turned around to see Judge Grayson standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at her. His usual stern expression had softened, replaced by something more thoughtful. "Miss Calloway," the judge said, his voice measured but respectful. "I have to say, I wasn't expecting this." He paused, looking her over carefully. "You've got a real talent for understanding the law. You handled yourself better than most lawyers I've seen. Have you ever thought about law school?" Ruby smiled, a little chuckle escaping her lips. She shook her head, the thought of law school not even on her radar. "No, Your Honor, I haven't," she replied. "I've fought my battle, and I won. But my work isn't done. I've got my bakery to run, and there are still people in my community who need help. That's where my focus will stay." Judge Grayson gave a small nod, clearly impressed. "Well, if you ever change your mind, you've got the skills for it. I'm sure you do well." Ruby smiled again, grateful for the compliment but confident in her decision. She had done what she set out to do. Her fight was never about becoming a lawyer, it was about protecting what mattered to her, the bakery, her community, and her family's legacy. As she left the courthouse, Ruby felt a sense of peace. Her fight had been won, but she knew her work wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, and she would be ready for them. Because Ruby Calloway wasn't just a grandmother or a small business owner, she was a fighter, and she wasn't about to back down anytime soon. Ruby's victory was about so much more than just winning a legal case, it was about standing up for what was right. It was about refusing to let anyone take what belonged to her, what had been built by her family over generations. The fight wasn't easy, and at times, it felt like the odds were stacked against her. But Ruby showed that with determination, courage, and the willingness to learn, anyone could challenge the status quo and win, even if the world had written you off. The heart of Ruby's success wasn't her legal knowledge, it was her refusal to back down. It didn't matter that she was 65, with no formal legal education or corporate experience. She had something much more valuable, a deep sense of right and wrong, a love for her community, and a belief that no one, no matter how powerful, should be allowed to take advantage of others. Ruby's case proved that justice is not reserved for the privileged or the well-connected. It's available to anyone who is willing to fight for it. She didn't just expose the wrongdoings of a corporation, she proved that the law can be used as a tool for fairness, that ordinary people can hold big companies accountable. Ruby didn't just protect her bakery, she protected the values of honesty, community, and hard work that small businesses like hers represent. Her fight wasn't about money or prestige, it was about standing firm in her belief that her family's legacy was worth more than anything a corporation could offer. Ruby's determination showed that the fight for justice isn't easy, but it's always worth it. What Ruby's victory teaches us is simple: no matter your age, experience, or background, you can stand up for what's right. You don't have to be a lawyer, a corporate executive, or anyone special. You just need to refuse to back down when something matters to you. Ruby proved that justice is within reach for anyone brave enough to pursue it. In the end, Ruby's victory was a triumph not just for herself, but for anyone who believes in fighting for the truth, no matter how tough the road may seem. It's a reminder that no one is ever too small to make a difference.